When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go downtown. That's not what the words are. Hello and welcome to episode 3 of LA Meekly, the podcast, all you loyal listeners. I mean listener. So today's, I'm Daniel.
I'm Greg.
Who?
I don't even know anymore.
This is the episode where we're going to talk about the downtown theater district.
Also known as the Broadway Theater District.
Broadway. We were curious why there were so many nice looking theaters there and why they're not so nice looking anymore and why it's so scary there. Mm-hmm. So we're getting to the bottom of this today once and for all.
Yeah, I went to high school near downtown LA, so we'd all go play in downtown after school. And the theaters there in downtown are not theaters anymore. Or like there was maybe, I think the Orpheum started to pick up like around the time I was in high school, like 2005-ish. That
BC?
Time. Yeah, BC. Yeah. No,
I'm trying to say he's old.
Christ was there.
I remember him.
Yeah, so I've always, the architecture there is beautiful. There's a lot of theaters, anyways, on Broadway.
Well, we'll find out exactly how many theaters.
Do you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's start with the big questions. Where did all these theaters come from? Why are they there? And why did they fail?
We should change the podcast name to Short Story Long.
The original title was Too Much History in 1 hour. So the Los Angeles Downtown Theater District is the largest theater district on the National Register of Historic Places. Mm-hmm. And it was designated so in 1979.
79.
Yeah.
Most of them were shut down by that point.
Yeah. It was the first theater district to make it onto the register. It's at downtown LA on Broadway. It starts at 3rd Street with the $1 Million Theater, and it goes all the way down to 9th Street with the United Artists Theater. In its heyday in the 20s and 30s, the downtown area, not just Broadway, but the surrounding streets.
Yeah.
There were a total of 33 theaters. 13 of these have been demolished completely to make room for the noble causes of parking lots. 8 of the original ones that were off Broadway are still there, but the ones we're talking about today are the 12 that are still on Broadway. Right. And it's all in a 6-block radius.
Yeah, and I read somewhere it was like the largest concentration of, I forget what website.
Yeah.
Of pre-World War movie palaces. They call them palaces, which I really like movie palaces in America. Isn't that cool?
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, they are palaces.
They are palaces, yeah. And I think on the website they said...
We're all just serfs. I get to look at the king for a day.
We saw The King and I there.
Yeah. They only show movies with kings in them.
Not The Lion King, though. Please, go ahead.
Not human kings. The 12 theaters that are on Broadway, there's the $1 Million Theater. This is going from north to south, I think, this list I have. The $1 Million Theater, the Roxy, the Cameo, the Arcade, the Los Angeles, the Palace, the State, the Globe, the Tower, the Rialto, the Orpheum, and the United Artists. Right. So most of these are no longer used for what they were supposed to be used for. A lot of them became churches and otherwise, which we'll get into. A lot of the architecture of these places has been mostly unchanged, though, from the 20s and 30s when they were built, because since they were not being used for so long, nobody figured, they didn't why bother.
Yeah, no one's ever going to come to downtown. Downtown LA is never going to have a resurgence ever.
No, never. So each of these theaters were designed in different architectural styles, so it adds a really fun eclecticism to the street. The critics at the time said that all the different styles were a pitiful degradation of art and that it was the prostitution of architecture, which is
the old profession.
It's what LA does best. So with so many really beautiful theaters in such a concentrated area, what could possibly have gone so horribly wrong for all of them to fail? Most of the story is a continuing theme of the city's population moving and their theaters and ways of consuming entertainment following them. So we'll start at the beginning. Fade in. The theater scene in LA started in 1870 by an undertaker turned showman named William Abbott. Wow. And he's the man that opened up the city's first permanent theater in the Pueblo area. It's just touching the Pico House in case you were trying to find it forever like I was. He named the theater after his wife, Merced.
Okay.
So it's the Merced Theater, which don't remember anything of the other podcast, but I think that was the place you said where they held the conference that established the founding of the Los Angeles Public Library.
It's very possible. There were like 2 buildings at the time.
Yeah.
1970, yeah.
And the other one was filled. There's a few times where the public library history intersects with this.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear them.
Yeah, so listen to both podcasts at the same time. If you play the Los Angeles Public Library podcast backwards while you listen to this one, they link up.
God gave you 2 ears.
So the Merced Theater for a while was where all the shows in the city used to be. In the 1880s, the development and population of the city started to move south from the Pueblo area, and the commercial center of LA focused onto the area that's around what is now known as like Spring and First.
Okay.
That led to a creation of a theater district along what is now Main Street, because it was following the population migration and it was accommodating their entertainment needs. And then in the late 1880s, City Hall was moved into this area, but not the current City Hall.
That's right.
You keen-eared listeners. The city wanted to move the commercial district away and keep this area more of just an administrative district, which it still is today. So they figured 2 streets over was far enough, and everything was moved over to Broadway. So then in 1903, the Mason Opera House broke the mold and opened up on Broadway rather than on Main where all the other ones are.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, department stores started opening up on Broadway. The first one that I read was opening on 3rd Street, but it wasn't until 1905 that the area was solidified as the new commercial district with the opening of the Hamburger Department Store,
Ooh,
which was also a temporary home for the Los Angeles Public
that's
Library
right. I
and
remember
the
making a
birthplace of hamburgers.
That's right.
Probably the same joke. And that was on Broadway and 8th. They had a really ornate exterior, and they had the largest aisles in the United States,
What does
whichever
that
that
even mean?
means.
Does that mean there's nothing in the middle? It's just walls?
Yeah,
That's
it was
a large
the whole
aisle.
store was one big aisle with an open space in the middle. So on its first day of business, 35,000 people showed up to ride the escalator.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can we take a minute to pretend to be those people on the escalator for the first time? They're like stairs, but they move, but I don't.
Call me when they get an elevator.
It's witchcraft.
So the reason the escalator was exciting, though, was because it was the only one west of St. Louis.
Jesus.
That's still not exciting, though. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1905. So soon after, with other stores coming in as well, Broadway became the retail capital of the U.S. So, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
That's kind of weird. That doesn't seem right.
It's not. So around this time, following the crowds, that's when vaudeville theaters started to pop up around on Broadway.
Yeah.
And then around 1910 came the Nickelodeons.
Yeah.
And then 1911 came the Nick Jr.
It's okay, but not as funny.
So various theaters started opening up on Broadway. But then in 1918, Sid Grauman took the game to the next level, and he opened up what is now known as the $1 Million Theater, which was LA's first grand movie palace, and it officially made Broadway LA's 3rd theater district. Now new ornate theaters started opening up, and they were all competing with each other to see who could be the best theater in town. That led to the architecture wars, where everyone tried to be more and more flamboyant and more unique than the last one.
It was the war that benefited everybody because they are really nice looking.
They are nice.
Gorgeous, yeah.
Yeah, it benefited everybody, but apparently critics.
Yep. Everybody's architect.
A side note on the architecture of the buildings that I have.
Please.
Most of the ornamentation and flair is situated on the tops of the buildings. And that was meant to impress the people in the other buildings across the street that were looking at them from the same level. Not for the riffraff on the street level, because you can't even fully see it from up there. So they're just trying to impress people that were as rich as them. And this was a tradition of the early 20th century, which was later rejected as a style. So the only other place with such details left on the building tops in the country is New York City. Yeah.
Coast to coast.
Yeah. So decorating these places so beautifully, it was a sign also of the new respectability that film as an art form was starting to earn for itself. Moviegoing was a special experience. So seeing the building, that was really nice.
And being there as you're watching the movie.
And there wasn't gum on all over the screen.
They didn't even have gum back then.
No. Well, they had gum, but it was made out of fossils.
They just had chewing tobacco for the kids.
Flavored chewing tobacco. They had bubblegum flavored chewing tobacco, but they didn't have bubblegum. No one knew what it meant. So more and more theaters were being built, and by 1931, Our Broadway in LA was the West Coast equivalent of New York's Great White Way, which was their Broadway.
Right.
Only they focused on live theater, we focused on movies.
Mhm.
And it had, like you said, the highest concentration of movie palaces in the world, with a combined seating on any night between all these theaters of 15,000.
Jesus.
And then this same year, 1931, it was when New York broke all the records with the Empire State Building going up, but
Mhm.
we broke the records going sideways, which sums up perfectly the key difference between how LA and New York they are. We're the fat city and they're tall and lanky.
We have more girth.
The city of Los Angeles decided it didn't have to stay in the downtown central area like
Mhm.
New York did, because we weren't constrained by the physical borders of water that New York has. So, I mean, if the LA River was something to be reckoned with,
We would be trapped
it would
between the Pacific and the river.
Yeah.
And then the curse of the Griffith Park would keep us, bordered in.
I know, we'd never be able to sleep.
Nope.
And after Jaws came out,
Oh my God.
can't
In the
go
70s?
can't go anywhere. Jaws came out in the 1870s.
Come watch this boy be eaten by a shark.
What's a boy? But the theaters didn't just do movies. They had, there were still theaters, and they had a stage.
Mm-hmm.
So many of them, which I know you're going to talk about, did vaudeville shows
Yeah.
and even music shows, and they had performers like the Marx Brothers,
Yes.
Charlie Chaplin, Houdini, Bing Crosby, W.C. Fields,
Ooh.
and Duke Ellington, all on the same show.
Hugh Smellington.
More like it. So now in the history, we're in the heyday, and this area was booming.
Mhm.
People would come to the theater district from all over the city to go do their shopping at the department stores, and then they'd go see a movie afterwards. And to make things even better, the yellow streetcar, it ran right down Broadway, which made getting there extremely convenient.
Mhm.
And then even better, Broadway at that time was the western end of Route 66. And that
Oh.
lasted until 1936. So a lot of tourists from all over the country were led straight into the trap of Broadway in its prime.
Right.
So things seem to be going really great. So now why God, did this happen?
I just have a small piece here about it slowly shifting to a new
Yeah.
form and things starting to stretch out.
This
Like you
is-
mentioned earlier, the way LA works, we started to spread everything, and you can't condense LA in like a little area. They're just not
Mm-mm.
like that.
New York is a haiku, and we're a Chaucer.
I just have in capital letters rats
In all senses.
in all senses.
There was the great rat invasion of the 40s.
They had finks and they had rats,
Some were even rat finks.
and then don't forget the stool pigeons as well.
It wasn't it wasn't just rats.
Yeah.
We like to joke on this program, but a giant rat, come on, listeners,
on.
a giant rat didn't come in and close all the theaters.
It was 10,000 small rats.
It wasn't just immediate event overnight that made all the theaters start to leave downtown. It was a really slow, painful, decades-long process that was contributed to by many different things.
Yeah.
So to start, as we said, the city was continuing to grow, and just how the Broadway district ended up on Broadway because the city was expanding south from the Pueblo area, the city began to move west from there, and in 1910, LA absorbed the city of Hollywood. In 1922, seeing this shift happening, Sid Grauman opened up another theater in Hollywood, which was the Egyptian Theater. Then Hollywood started to become this mega entertainment cluster around this time, and capitalizing even further, Grauman opened the Chinese Theater in 1927. So the guy who started Broadway actually became the guy that put the bullet in its head that didn't kill it for another 80 years.
Did you know that the guys dressed like Shrek and Captain America were actually there before the theater, though? Did you know that? A lot of people don't know that.
They came over from Broadway also. As long as there's been Superman, there's been a guy standing on Hollywood Boulevard dressed as him.
It was called Hollywood Land Boulevard at the time.
And he was super fellow. But I was wondering, why Hollywood? Of all the places, why Hollywood? I thought it was because all the studios were there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really make sense because a lot of them were in the valley, like in Burbank, and those areas didn't become what Hollywood was at that time. This was because of a man named C.E. Toberman,
Okay.
which I'd never heard of before. I'm sure he'll come up in the future. But he was the grand designer behind Hollywood, and he consciously wanted to make Hollywood a brand and branded as the entertainment capital of the world.
Did it work?
I don't know.
I bought a mug the other day that said I heart Hollywood. I think it worked.
You did it again, Toberman.
Doberman!
He courted Grauman, so that was where he decided to open his new theaters.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, in 1936, the end of Route 66 was changed from Broadway to Santa Monica, which reflected the changing focus of the city as a whole. We weren't cared about downtown.
That's what I thought the moves west meant, was everyone was going to Santa Monica because everything was
exactly.
getting, you can
It was
capture.
all fun.
Yeah, until Daddy takes a T-bird away.
That was changing the focus of the whole city. It was all about sunshine and soda pop.
They were changing the image of Southern California because they wanted it to reflect the weather, because they were moving everybody west.
It was our selling point. But really the main reason for the downfall was that after World War II, people just started moving into the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, the suburbs were new. And the city had been expanding steadily westward into more open, undeveloped areas and into the valley as well. So plain and simple, the population left downtown, so the theater owners gave up on the Broadway theaters because there was no point.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not Hollywood didn't live happily forever after.
It didn't even start off happily.
No, it was a miserable situation the whole time. Because as people who live here know, and as people who come to visit, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, they find out very quickly that Hollywood really is not a nice place.
Yeah.
Because the city continued expanding to the west. So in the 1960s, Hollywood lost the entertainment cachet, and the theater started moving to Westwood.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I thought the western parts of the city, like Santa Monica and all that, are still really nice places compared to Hollywood and downtown, because the city couldn't expand any further west and abandon anymore. If there were 2 more miles, Santa Monica would be garbage at this point. So with the population now in the suburbs, offices and restaurants and retailers followed them, and that led to the creation of shopping malls, which was the communal gathering places of the new suburbs. So as usual, the entertainment followed the population, and this led to the creation of multiplexes, which is where people began to see their movies. So then rather than going all the way into the city to one of the grand theaters that only showed one movie at a time, they just go, we can see whatever we want, and we can buy junior mints, which
were called mints at the time.
That's another reason why the theater district failed, because they didn't sell junior mints.
Yeah, that's what it was, wasn't it? Yeah. They didn't get the Seinfeld reference, and they just got left behind in the dust.
They knew yada yada yada. I have another side note. All this led me to wondering, with all the ornate theaters downtown and in the Hollywood area, what was the Warner Grand Theater doing in San Pedro?
Hey, you're right.
Because it's so weird that it would be all the way there. It's just as nice as all the other ones, but it's in the middle of just Fisherman's Wharf.
Yeah.
I found out that to us, like, the Warner Grand Theater is really unique and special, but it turns out that in this period of time, it was just a typical neighborhood movie theater. The Warner Brothers also built similar theaters in Beverly Hills and in Huntington Park, and then other companies like Fox West Coast, which we're going to hear about later also.
Yeah.
They were building a lot of theaters in all the remote suburban pockets of LA.
Yeah.
So there were all these theater palaces that could hold about 1,500 also. They had them in Fairfax and La Brea and Westlake and everywhere. So every neighborhood had its own ornate movie palace. But then by the 30s, more and more theaters like these were being built, but they were becoming less and less ornate and less unique. So that's why.
Okay. That's a good answer.
That's an answer.
That's an answer, all right. Yeah, because that is a really nice theater. It's not, and speaking of that, it's not as nice as the downtown theaters, but it seems like
it's
a
also
cool neighborhood.
More haunted.
It's certainly more haunted than most theaters.
It just seems weird that it's so cut off there, but what we're missing is that the body that was connecting it to the rest of all the theaters has just been demolished by now.
And the whole way, I think Huntington Park all the way maybe to Long Beach had that whole Art Deco thing going on. I was probably later though, but they had a lot of things that were trying to live up to what was happening downtown.
And boy, did it work. So downtown was still a first-run film destination into the 50s. But by the 70s and 80s, the only things that were keeping the theaters, the ones that were still there alive, were action movies and blaxploitation movies. But then most importantly, Mexican films and variety shows.
Right on.
So then after World War II, when the rich people started to leave downtown and the theaters followed them, the department stores still stayed. And then they started catering to the growing Spanish-speaking immigrant and working class population that was moving into the area. So then by the 70s and 80s, Broadway became the shopping and theater destination for Spanish-speaking families. All these Spanish-speaking shoppers and moviegoers, that's what saved all these theaters from complete ruin. Because, I mean, if they weren't showing those things, they'd They
would
had
be-
nothing.
Yeah,
They had nothing.
Yeah.
And the shopping on Broadway, it became a destination itself by selling, really cheap clothes that drew a lot of shoppers. And so much so that in the 90s, some of these stores had rents that were even higher than some of the stores in Beverly Hills. That didn't
No.
last either. The stores started to fail as other shopping districts geared towards Spanish-speaking families started popping up all over the city. And then in the late 80s and early 90s, something huge came up that started to eat away even further at these dying theaters.
Rats.
One giant rat.
His name was Milo.
The thing that it was home video.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because then the theaters by this point, they weren't even showing, they weren't showing the most current movies. So they started drawing fewer and fewer crowds when people could see the same movies that they were showing in theaters in their own homes.
Right.
Why go out?
When it hits late 80s and early 90s, you have I always bring it up, but the earthquakes and the riots, being in downtown and there's an earthquake, nobody downtown it's a sketchy place. Especially in the 90s, it became a horrible place to be.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of stories from the elders about downtown, and
We're not supposed to speak of it.
the only reason my family even went to downtown was probably the library.
And for the blaxploitation films.
They loved Foxy Brown.
So now we're at the lowest point of the theater district's history. So now we're going to go into a few specific theaters to show case studies of what exactly happened. I'm going to do the $1 Million Theater.
Oh, I went there. It's very nice.
Yeah, it is. I wish I had gone in there, but
I think UCLA has that film thing there where they'll play a movie once a month, and we saw the Sam Fuller double feature there. It was really nice in there.
the $1 Million Theater, well, it wasn't called that yet. It was Sid Grauman's first theater in LA.
That's a horrible name for a theater.
It's not much better, the real original name of it. So it opened February 1st, 1918 with the premiere of The Silent Man.
Okay.
And in attendance were the likes of Charlie Chaplin, Hal Roach, Cecil B. DeMille, and Lillian Gish.
Ooh.
It was originally called Grauman's Theater.
Boy,
Yeah.
he really knocked
It was
it out
really
of the park.
edgy at that time. It was called that until 1922 when it was renamed to reflect how much it cost to construct. $1 billion.
The price of an average ticket there.
It's located on Broadway and 3rd. And the building, which was the Laughlin Block, and this is the third library connection of the night,
Let's hear it.
that also was a temporary home of the library.
On Laughlin Block?
Laughlin Block, yeah.
I didn't know that. Maybe I should listen
Were
to
you
the
listening?
podcast. Maybe I should listen to the podcast.
That's
again.
when you left in the middle of the podcast.
I thought you said Laughlin.
The Laughlin Block was owned by Homer Laughlin,
Okay.
who also owned the Grand Central Market.
Ugh.
That's where the giant rat now slumbers under a pile of
Drags
pupusas. There's 12 stories of offices above the theater, and the one on the top floor belonged to William Mulholland,
Is that right?
who's the guy that ran the Metropolitan Water District, the Metropolitan Walla Walla Water District,
The Wallet District.
which was the precursor to the DWP, and he's the guy that was the inspiration for the movie Chinatown.
Yeah.
So that's where all of LA's water wars happened, when everyone was
Upstairs.
on the street with super soakers. So many lives
So
lost.
much death.
Some wounds never dry. The theater itself was the first theater palace built specifically for movies, and it had an orchestration pit that extended halfway up the stage to show off the musicians that were accompanying the movies, but that only lasted until 1922 when the pit caught on fire during a show.
Not funny.
It's funny now. So then it got rebuilt in a normal way, so we can't see those disgusting musicians playing.
God.
The projection room also had doors made of steel and asbestos to
Ah.
prevent fires and keep everyone there nice and safe and healthy. It can seat 2,345 people in there, and the theater had a deal to show the Paramount/Famous Players Lasky movies, but Sid Grauman, being the showman that he was, it became known for its lavish premieres of movies and the shows that would be put on before the movies started. Grauman started doing this sort of thing just a year after the theater opened. He called them prologues that would be before the films, and they were just like various live shows and events. They even had like big fashion shows that would go on before a movie, which sounds really fun.
Doesn't it?
That's the only time I would watch a fashion show, if they were showing The Brave Little Toaster afterward. These shows lasted until the late 20s when talkies came along, and they didn't, that was enough. That wowed people enough.
Yeah.
Grauman perfected the art of his prologues at the Chinese theater when he started having movie stars put their hands and feet in cement out front of the theater before the premieres. So that's how that started.
Have you seen Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell when they did Gentlemen Prefer Blondes? When they did that?
No.
It's pornographic. Sorry. I just want every time
Cement everywhere. So like we talked about before, Grauman sold his steak in the $1 Million Theater. He was just hawking steaks everywhere. He would have prologue before the show, then the movie, and then afterwards you would have to buy a seasoned steak from him.
Steaks for the board.
Get your official Grauman steak with Marilyn Monroe's handprint in it.
Don't ask how she did it.
The other downtown theaters that he had stakes in were also the Rialto and the Metropolitan. So he got out of it and he left for Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, this theater changed hands a few times, including being owned by Fox West Coast. But the government wasn't happy about this because of all the scrutiny that movie studios were getting for owning theaters at this time. Led to them having to sell it off as part of the antitrust acts that they imposed. But then in 1935, it was bought by the Harry Popkins Circle Theaters Company, who turned it into a place that put on stage shows, and they showed also second-run films. So in the 40s, it started to focus more housing jazz and big band, like Lionel Hampton was there, Billie Holiday, Dizzy Gillespie.
Ooh.
And then in 1945, it got leased by Metropolitan Theaters, who at this time, they were doing vaudeville shows at the Orpheum, which you're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, they decided to bring vaudeville to the $1 Million and then do the first-run movies at the Orpheum instead.
Right.
And then in the 50s, the theater got subleased to Frank Fucci? He started showing the Spanish-language films, and he was putting on Mexican vaudeville shows. Okay. But then Fucci died in 1969, so his son, who just died last year, took over, and he continued on with the Spanish language tradition. Mm-hmm. So the Spanish stuff, that lasted until 1993 when the theater closed and became the Universal Church. And then the church left in 1998, and then back comes the Spanish language movies.
Right.
But that only lasted a year, and then they closed again and became another church. And then eventually that church closed, and in 2005, the theater got a $1 million makeover, which is why they now call it the $1 Million Makeover Theater. And then in February 2008, it reopened for concerts and to occasionally show old movies, like we were saying. It's also, you can see it in the background of Blade Runner a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the Bradbury Building's right across the street.
Oh, that's right.
So what theater are you going to do?
I'm going to talk about the Orpheum vaudeville circuit. I'm going to concentrate more on vaudeville than the movies, just because I was a little bit more interested in it. The Orpheum that I read a lot about turned out to not be the Orpheum that's there now. It's actually what is the Palace. I believe it's not even on Broadway. It's on Spring. The Orpheum, the one that's there now, is on 842 South Broadway. It's the second to last one up there. It's still active. It's probably the most prosperous of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have like real shows.
Yeah, they have real people go
Yeah.
there. Yeah. You could tell it's the most prosperous because they film the best movies there. The Orpheum was a whole series. It was a vaudeville circuit. This one on Broadway was the last one of the circuit. The other three there was one on Main Street. It was the Grand Opera House. It was built in 1894. It was also at some point called the Child's Opera House, and that later became the Lyceum Theater. There was another one on 227 South Spring Street called the Los Angeles Theater, which I think moved eventually to...
Yeah, that's on Broadway.
I think they switched the Lyceum back and forth. They switched names, apparently. There's 630 South Broadway, which they say is now the Palace. That's the Orpheum that I'm going to be talking about.
Okay.
Was the last of the Orpheum theaters. It's most successful, and it's probably the most successful of all the theaters on Broadway to this day. Planning began in 1923, and they opened it on February 15th, 1926, the 88th birthday of the Orpheum is about to happen in a couple days. Interesting. They're not going to do anything, though.
Doesn't want to call attention to it,
We don't talk age around here. The whole vaudeville circuit was started by a guy named Gustav Walter. It was a chain, and it was started up north in San Francisco, and then he brought it down here. He was a German...
Yeah, I feel like the name Orpheum, I feel like every city has an Orpheum theater.
Yeah. Apparently, it goes from... I mean, he started in San Francisco. He came down to L.A., and then he slowly moved east, but I don't think he ever made it to like New York. I think the farthest he went was like Memphis. There is one in Memphis that I was reading.
He died somewhere in there.
So I was reading a lot about a theater that ended up being in Memphis, and I was really mad because it was juicy. Fires, people fired left and right.
Oh, God,
I was in Memphis. I know.
Memphis.
It's a really big theater.
Just like their barbecue.
I don't get it. The architect for this was a guy named G. Albert Langsberg. He designed this. He designed the Wiltern on Wilshire and Western. He designed the El Capitan Theater. Oh. He designed the Shrine. They're all beautiful theaters. Oh, the Shrine's interior, but they're all really beautiful theaters.
Not impressed.
No, not doing anything for me. What's the Shrine?
The Shrine to what?
I don't know if you've been in the Shrine recently. I went for they have a comic convention there every month, and I went maybe 2 years ago. It's
Which one is the Shrine?
The Shrine is
that the
near
one near
USC.
Yeah,
near,
the one that looks like a temple.
Yeah, it looks like a temple. It's
The
called
one
the
that
Shrine.
is a shrine.
It's a shrine. It looks like a temple, but inside it looks like Gotham City. It looks dank. The Orpheum has 6 floors. 6 floors of dressing rooms, a film projector, like they say, a world-class sound system. It has one of the last surviving Mighty Wurlitzer theater organs there, and it's in prime shape.
Wow.
It was a 235 special when it started, and they updated it to a 240, style 240. I don't know what that means. Only 24 organs of this style were built, and this is one of the last 15 that is still playable right here in downtown LA.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can anyone play it?
Yeah. See what happens. You let me know what happens.
14 left.
Is someone playing chopsticks on the organ?
No. There's dynamite on that key.
The organ has pretty much remained there since the theater opened in 1926. The only time it was removed was when a restoration crew took over in the 70s, and they wanted to revamp it, and they put it back in there. And there's a new composer named Cameron Carpenter, and I hear he's very good, according to the website where I read all of this.
CameronCarpenter.com.
I want to talk about the guy who started the Orpheum circuit. He was a German immigrant. He came from New York. He started in New York. He was known as one of the most energetic and successful amusement caterers in the country. They keep calling him amusement caterer, which I think is a really cool term. He was very careful in his business. He was very courageous. He would take a lot of dares. He didn't lose a lot of money. He didn't lose a lot of money.
He didn't lose too much money.
He knew what was going to hit. He had this foresight about what entertainment was going to hit. He only lost money. He started something called the Vienna Gardens. And he kept hiring these expensive European acts, and it didn't turn out. So he lost a lot of money. He had to sell it for a while, and then he ended up reclaiming it. And he did it with the help of a guy named Morris Mayerfield Jr., a very shrewd businessman who was not enthusiastic about entertainment at all. He was all business, and he shows up in the story later on. Once he reclaimed the Orpheum circuit, he did very well with it. He came down to LA, he opened 4 theaters, and they all pretty much did very well. For as long as vaudeville lasted, the theaters did really well. He died of an appendicitis. Sound familiar?
That could have been you.
It could have been. And then ownership went over to Mayerfield and a guy named Martin Beck, who both will come back later. Los Angeles vaudeville gets very little respect in comparison to East Coast acts, because they were pretty much, like you said, there were a lot of live performances, and over here was a lot of movies and stuff. But we had our own thing, I suppose. I was reading about that was a lot different because our city was different and everything was spreading out and movies were getting involved and everything. Between 1910 and 1926, the rise of popularity of vaudeville can be measured by the boom of theaters. In 1906 to 1907, there were 13, including the Orpheum, the Unique, the Novelty, and the Star, which all closed really quickly. By 1914, apparently they said there was 71 listed in the entire city of LA, spread throughout. 20% of those were what they call small-time theaters, meant specifically for small vaudeville acts, and they were run by the troops, not the military, the vaudeville troops.
I stood up and saluted when you said that.
And they were managed by their own people, which I thought was really interesting, because they were a lot of remote vaudeville acts that were over here in LA. They were managed by a giant a giant group in New York. They would do the hard travel to the other side of the coast, and then they would work. They'd have little remote vaudeville groups here, and then the manager of whoever brought them out would take care of who they booked, the payroll, the personnel. So they were these extensions that I don't know. I just kind of thought that was interesting to read about. LA was a favorite city because it was a new city, so they kind of had a lot to work with, sort of a new audience that wasn't used to sort of stuff. So they had all the old jokes in New York were doing better here. It did really well because LA hadn't become the film center of the world yet, so they were doing really well. And LA offered, because it was a new city, they offered entertainers reasonable housing costs. Audiences were really eager to see live performances because it wasn't a big thing. And then let's not forget the weather. Beautiful.
Let me take off my sunglasses and talk about the weather a little bit.
I can't hear you through my board shorts. So during the heyday of vaudeville, there was really 4 theaters that really were getting popular. The Pantages, owned by Alexander Pantages, was the smallest theater, and they were notorious for not providing adequate commodities for traveling acts.
Define commodities. Are we talking toilets here?
Possibly toilets, rooms, and board and stuff like that. In comparison to everything I say about the Orpheum, just think the opposite when you think the Pantages.
Oh,
there we go.
I already did.
Oh boy. The Pantages was just a small theater. The Hippodrome, my favorite name of the theaters. The Clune, and then there's the Orpheum. The Orpheum we're speaking of right now is the one that eventually becomes the Palace.
Okay.
It was just the biggest, so I feel if I'm talking about vaudeville, I'm talking about, they call it the Orpheum at the time.
Yeah.
It was the king of the theaters. That's all. I want to end on that. The Orpheum was the king of the theaters. It was the largest. It offered the best commodities to entertainers, and it also offered to them the most receptive audience. Like people who came to the Orpheum really wanted to see. They were expecting the best kind of shows, and then they also
They didn't just come here to get cooking blouses and then stumble into a movie theater.
exactly,
afterwards.
and they just wanted to see a pie in the face.
Yeah.
It wasn't those rubes.
They were highbrow.
Each theater operated differently, and the Orpheum did everything on a grand scale. And you could house like 1,200 patrons. It offered like a live orchestra with the Wurlitzer, which was really it had like the greatest sound system apparently of all the theaters. And it had like the biggest stage. It was 40 by 68 by 31, which means something in measurements, I suppose. They offered 2 shows a day. Most of them offered 2 shows a day, but they had like the best time slots, like 2:15 the matinee and then 8:15 for the afternoon show.
Midnight show at
midnight show.
8:15.
The evening show. Excuse me, the evening show at 8:15.
That's the original Tonight Show.
Yeah, remember? Most bills pretty much worked out like this. There would be a dumb act, quotation marks, which was usually like an animal circus or something for the dumb kids, they just love that stuff. There was a musical number that was usually like a solo performance, and then the comedy team would come out and do like a sketch for everybody. There'd be a playlet, which is a little baby play.
It's a play starring babies?
Yeah. And after the play, they had their first headliner. They'd have an intermission, which usually was either like a photo play or the orchestra would play a piece, just to keep everybody's mind moving along. They'd have the second headliner, and then they have the final act, which I thought the final act would be something really grand. They'd be a dumb show in quotations, or here's something very interesting, something called a flash act, which was all the performances all on the stage at the same time. I know. Isn't that cool?
It's like the end of a Mel Brooks movie.
And Hitler's there in the background too.
Springtime.
I think a flash act sounds so cool.
That does sound. That sounds a little. I think I'd be a little frightened when the tiger jumping through the hoop came out at the same time as the
juggler,
the one-armed man juggling plates. Well, we'll talk about when the rebuilding they're doing, but they should restart vaudeville. If they're going to restart all this, they should restart vaudeville.
Hipsters would love that.
Oh my God.
To get back on topic, the Orpheum was renowned for treating their performers very well, and this is thanks for the hero of this story is a guy named Clarence Drown, who was the manager of the Orpheum at the time. The Orpheum had 15 dressing rooms with 2 off stage.
15 dressing rooms.
15 dressing rooms because they knew how to take care of their performers. Yeah. They had 2 showers in each.
Maybe they didn't know how to take care of their performers.
2 showers in each dressing room.
Oh wow!
And a large washing room for animal acts. Other theaters paid all their talent backstage after the show. Questions?
How many makeup mirrors did the animal dressing rooms have?
Just one big one. The chimps, the monkeys, and the tigers all had to share. And the little penguin would have to sit under the elephant legs.
And the hippo couldn't even put his lipstick on properly.
Vaudeville is so scary. So many dead animals. The other theaters would pay the talent like backstage after the show, but the Orpheum was very professional. They dished out checks once a week on Saturdays from a manager's office, like real people should be treated. Yeah, that was the place where everyone wanted to perform, and that's where everyone wanted to go see like a really great performance, like I mentioned. So it was really nice to have a place like the Orpheum that housed that kind of environment. It was very performer friendly.
So the Orpheum that is still there today is this. That's this place,
No, this
right?
is right now. This is the Palace, but it was called the Orpheum at the time.
Okay.
To get back to Clarence Drown, he managed the theater from 1902 to 1918, which is a good stretch. This is from somebody who worked for Clarence Drown. This comes from an article that saved my life during this. It's called Vaudeville in Los Angeles, 1910 to 1926. Theaters Management and the Orpheum by Stan Singer. A really good article about vaudeville at the time. And this is a quote about Clarence Drown that I liked a lot. Clarence Drown would tell all the stagehands explicitly about his concern for the performers. So this is what he would tell stagehands. They arrive here Monday from San Francisco after a long, tiresome journey. Being temperamental, they naturally pack a grouch. Now, it is our play to foster this grouch. We must show them that they are welcome, and I want you to get them everything they ask for. If they have a grievance, do all in your power to remedy it. Under no circumstance argue or irritate them in any way. We must get the best work out of them. Can you believe that?
So he treated his performers well.
Very much so. He treated the performers well, and that's why everyone wanted to go to the Orpheum, because Clarence Drown worked there. He pampered all these people. His practices were so revered that W.C. Fields wrote a variety article on them called A Regular House, and he pretty much just kisses his ass all over. And he says some of the nicest things about him.
I can't imagine W.C. Fields being nice to anybody.
I think it was part of a joke. It's like an Annie Kaufman thing.
Annie Kaufman?
Annie Kaufman. It's a split between Annie Hall and Andy Kaufman. He's just talking about how nice the Orpheum is, how qualified Drown is and everything. I thought all W.C. Fields knew about drowning was in liquor, but whatever. I'm not going to read like W.C. Fields because I don't have that much talent. A dozen sets of furniture are stocked away in a storeroom. You may call for anything from horsehair to a gold set valued at $800 and get it. All the draperies used on stage are the kind one would find in a millionaire's home. I never have been inside the habitat of a modern Croesus, but I have read the books. So basically he's just kissing everyone's ass right there. And he knew how to hold a great performance like top to bottom. He encouraged the conductor of the house, whose name was A.F. Frankenstein, who also wrote the music for the state song I Love California. His name's A.F. Frankenstein.
A.F. Frankenstein?
Yeah, his name's A.F. Frankenstein. He's the house conductor of the Orpheum.
Oh my god.
His name's Frankenstein. There's some really funny names in all this. Clarence Drown is a really funny name.
It is funny that Frankenstein works with Drown.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. He instructed Frankenstein to not play the hits.
Now you're just reading the book. Frankenstein, don't you play the hits? Frankenstein wanna play Swanee. Our apologies to the Frankenstein family. They've been through a lot already.
He instructed him not to play the hits because he wanted to discourage audience members from singing along and becoming too familiar in the audience with vocalizing their... He didn't want them to get too comfortable. Yeah. Like Married with Children, when every time Kelly came out, people were like, what?
Yeah, and every time Al would stick his hand in his pants and everyone would go...
Only you would. At home.
Everyone did that, right?
Sitting between your parents.
Everyone knows what I'm talking about.
Look, Mom, like me.
Look, Mom, I'm Al Bundy.
And I hate women. He also wouldn't let in late patrons while an act was in performance.
I like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So if you came late and there was something going on, he'd keep you outside, or he'd instruct the ushers to keep you outside.
He personally would rip up your ticket.
Mr. Drown, we need you down here again. The lucky loser here. And he also doubled the number of ushers to add speed to efficiency for a lot of the big shows, which I think was really great. The first show at the Orpheum was as follows. The Orpheum Orchestra conducted the Tannhauser March and the Jubal Overture. Then Hal Ford, an English comedian and impersonator, took the stage, followed by a melodrama sketch titled The Little Stranger. After that, Henry Clive, a think magician, came on. After Henry Clive, a female
music... What is a think magician?
I was looking that up. I don't really know. I think it's like a... Not like a hypnotist, but like one of those like read your mind things.
Telepath?
Yeah, a telepath.
A telegram.
A telegram.
Oh, yeah, it's a telegram.
It's a telegram, yeah. After that, a music group called the Boston Fidettes came on. And then after the Fidettes, Isabel
the Mighty Boston Fidettes.
Yeah, the Mighty... After that, Isabel de Armand was a dance and talk act. I don't know what talk is in the quotations. And then something called A Legitimate Hold-Up was a drama.
A legitimate hold-up?
A legitimate hold-up, which I think
maybe they legitimately got robbed on opening night.
First 3 rows, stand up! And then there's a comedy duo of Ed Wynn and P.O. O'Malley, and they performed something called Daffodils, and it ended with Bowers, Walters, and Crocker was another comedy act. And then they closed with something called the Daylight Pictures, which was like short documentary travel logs. But I imagine it's just pictures of daylight. For that first show, I think this really interested. All the patrons and friends were invited backstage to like see the theater equipment and meet everybody. Like they met Landsberg, the architect.
Everybody was invited backstage?
I think it says I read patrons were invited to come backstage and check out everything like behind the scenes, which I thought was really cool. They met A.F. Frankenstein was there, the conductor.
Everyone wanted to meet him.
But he was in chains, though.
He does not like flash photography.
They wanted to get him to sing, If You're
Putting on the Ritz.
Put it on the Ritz, thank you. I only know it by starting the first couple lyrics. Brown was back there meeting everybody. The architect Landsberg was back there. And then about like 1926, 1927, the Orpheum circuit was purchased by the Keith Albee Corporation studio. And the merger led to the opening of the new Orpheum on 9th and Broadway.
That's the one that's there now.
Then that's the one that's there now. And that one I'm about to get into because it's caught up in a whole scandal of stuff. The Orpheum that Drown managed continued to host vaudeville until like 1929 when film began to take over and then slowly started to dwindle away. Drown had retired in the early 20s and continued to live like a leisurely life. He was never murdered, cheated, or beaten, so I'm very happy about that.
Oh. He wasn't even murdered once?
I mean, I didn't do the best research.
How did he die?
I didn't even want to look it up. I didn't even
hope
want to
he
look it
tried.
up. I think he's still alive right now. A man who's managing the Orpheum.
Searching the Arctic for Frankenstein.
It's 1929. So the merger happened. I read it happened in like 26, 27. It was between the Keith Albee studio or corporation and then the Orpheum, and it created the Keith Albee Orpheum. They now own the vaudeville circuit, which was once the Orpheum. The merger happens apparently 10 weeks after The Jazz Singer premieres in New York. It seemed to mark the rise of film and the decline of vaudeville because it was like they were singing and dancing on film and like
we don't need to see real people here
exactly
anymore.
And we could see the same performance over and over. And so
no surprises.
No surprises.
This was a time when people didn't want surprises anymore.
Do you know what was right around the corner? The biggest surprise.
The biggest depression.
Surprise! Welcome to the Dust Bowl. So Keith Albee was a bigger circuit than the Orpheum at the time. E.F. Albee had substantial stock in Keith Albee and was the president of the corporation. His lieutenant was a guy named J.J. Murdoch. Now Murdoch brought in Joe Kennedy into this deal. Kennedy, the patriarch of the Kennedy family. Very scary man. Kennedy had a majority ownership over something called the Film Booking Office, which was a studio during the silent films era. It's called FBO. Ruthless businessman, apparently. Now, Murdoch wanted to get into the film business because it was just starting to happen, and he didn't see it like slowing down anytime soon, which, he was wrong. He looked to Kennedy to lead this company into the new business and putting Murdoch himself into a commanding role. Because he brought Kennedy in. He's hoping Kennedy will make him into the commander. In less than a year, Keith Albee Orpheum was no more. It was gone. They turned it into something called the Radio Keith Orpheum because Albee was out. And its business refocused.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I see where this is going.
This is scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
And its business refocused by the participation of the Radio Corporation of America called RCA, founded by David Sarnoff, who also headed the first and most developed radio network, National Broadcasting System, NBC. The new agenda included RCA's development of an improved sound system for sound motion pictures, the adaptation of the Keith Orpheum operation to distribute and exhibit movies like coast to coast, like a network of theaters, and they utilized Kennedy's FBO studios to produce all of the talking pictures. Now, Albee was ousted from power. His name's no longer in the company, and Murdoch didn't get Albee's seat afterwards. Kennedy pretty much takes everything, and then in 1948 sells it to Howard Hughes. Bam! That's how you do business.
Oh my God.
Howard Hughes.
And that's how Howard Hughes became president.
Yeah. Kennedy, this doesn't relate to any of this other than the fact that I liked it. Kennedy was having an affair with Gloria Swanson of Sunset Boulevard fame.
The Kennedys loved to
they
have
loved
affairs
it.
with movie stars.
And then his son.
His daughter, Jackie.
That's Joe Kennedy. Kennedy was known for digging up dirt on competitors and blackmailing them into unwanted business deals. The most interesting folklore of this, in my opinion, regarding this podcast anyways, is as follows. Mm-hmm. In 1929, Alexander Pantages, owner of the Pantages dealer, which was the smaller of the vaudeville theaters, was accused of raping a woman named either Esther or Eunice, I read both, Pringle, in a broom closet. Now, Pantages was a Greek immigrant, and the tabloids of the day, which was the Alley Examiner, led by William Randolph Hearst, like this, took daily beatings on Pantages because he was an immigrant. They kept calling him a beast. They just trashed him. They just tore him apart in the paper, and they made Miss Pringle out to be like this saint, and they made her out to sound a lot younger and more innocent than she was. So it went to trial, and he was found guilty. Now, if this was true, good and great, and he deserves everything that happens to him. But there's a rumor out there that Kennedy paid Esther or Eunice Pringle to lie about the event, or at least have it staged, because Pantages wouldn't sell the theater. And in the end, he had to sell RKO to Kennedy. Years later, either Esther or Eunice Pringle claimed to want to come clean about the story, and then she mysteriously died of carbon monoxide poisoning.
That doesn't just happen.
No, it does not. And then that's RKO pretty much turns the Orpheum into a movie house.
And RKO, I had no idea. That stands for, what was the R, and then there's the Keith and the Orpheum. So
yeah, the Radio Keith Orpheum.
I had no idea.
Radio Keith Orpheum.
So that's why the RKO tower is, I think, on top of the Orpheum, right?
Yeah, I believe it is.
Which is also our logo.
Popular entertainment shifted to movies. The Orpheum adapted to that in 1928, around the time that the merger happened, or like a year later. They kept the Wurlitzer organ. They installed it, so they played there in silent pictures and stuff. In 1929, the LA Times ran a story just saying that the Orpheum was the last stronghold of the vaudeville west of the Rockies, but they were putting in all this film equipment, so they were still pumping it as vaudeville, but they're slowly switching over. A lot of vaudeville switched over to the $1 Million Theater in the 40s because they started showing pictures at RKO. RKO was putting out pictures as well. They had a lot of really big ones
King Kong?
King Kong was one. It's a Wonderful Life was one. There's another big one. Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
King Kong versus Godzilla.
Citizen Kane was a RKO picture.
Mm-hmm.
Hunchback of Notre Dame, King Kong, like you said. It's a Wonderful Life. The Best Years of Our Lives. A lot of Fred and Ginger movies. It closes in the 70s just because the decline of everything. Orpheum was one of the first ones to close, but then it picks up about the 2000, and I think they said 2003, and it undertook a $3 million renovation, which started in
How come it
1989.
got more than the $1 Million Theater?
Do you really want to know? It's now the most active. They have concerts there all the time. Tickets are really expensive.
Yeah, they have like really popular, cool. It's the cool place.
It is the cool place to go. And they film a lot of movies there, like That Thing You Do was filmed there. Yeah, I know. Take us there, Skitch. I was surprised there wasn't more porn theaters in downtown. They're all on Hollywood Boulevard.
Me too. I thought that's what it became once all this started happening.
Yeah,
but I guess
we're
the
thinking
churches. There were too many churches.
There were too many
People felt
churches.
weird.
I think we're both thinking of 42nd Street, New York, in the 70s.
I know.
Pretty sure.
Their Broadway.
Their-
Our Broadway is nice and clean. We have churches.
We have Mexican churches, which is more faithful than other churches. Trust me. Imagine going to church in downtown.
I witnessed.
Oh yeah, that's
we
right.
went into the state and witnessed it. It's weird. It's a lot of like jump up and down and waggle your fingers.
I'm pretty sure that was the church.
I think it might have been the YMCA. Now, what I have is the last theater on the street, the United Artists Theater.
Mm-hmm.
So, first off, the United Artists was an independent film studio that was started by D.W. Griffith, Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and Mary Pickford. So they started it to get away from the other big studios so that they could make the movies they wanted to make. So they were like kind of like the first independent film production company.
Were they were United Artists?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The United Artists Theater was really the brainchild of Mary Pickford. She was the one that really pushed for it. Charlie Chaplin was against it because he said that they should be focusing on making movies and not projecting them.
Okay.
It opened December 26, 1927 with the showing of My Best Girl, which starred, conveniently, Mary Pickford.
Oh, not My Best Girl.
You and Gloria Swanson. Why don't you go see a Gloria Swanson movie? So it's on 9th Street and Broadway.
Yeah.
Its Gothic style was chosen by Pickford because she went on a trip to Europe and saw all the castles and decided that she wanted one too.
Oh.
So the theater, it was actually from the beginning operated by Fox West Coast again.
Okay.
And it was called the final word in theater construction, which I guess is a good thing. It had an air conditioning type system that had dehumidifiers in the main room so it would keep the viewers comfortable.
Was that the mushroom thing I kept reading about? Probably
Mushroom
not.
thing. Ew,
I read
gross.
people talking about like a mushroom air conditioning system under seats. Maybe not.
Like mushrooms were under every seat.
I don't know what they're talking about. That's why I hope you knew.
And it could seat 2,214 people.
Mm-hmm.
It was equipped with a mighty Wurlitzer organ,
Ooh.
another one. It cost $60,000.
That sounds about right.
The organ was $60,000, and it was there up until 1955 where it was removed. I have no idea where it went.
Oh boy.
It had phone booths in there also that were modeled to look like Catholic confessional booths. They're still there, actually.
Really?
Yeah, and I think they can't have phones in them anymore. I guess they're just like booths.
Yeah.
They're actually Catholic confessionals.
For your convenience.
In the 30s, Paramount Publix theaters bought up all of Sid Grauman's holdings in the theaters downtown, and they thought that the Grauman name would be good for business, so they started calling it Grauman's United Artists, even though he had nothing to do with it, which seems so illegal.
Yeah.
I don't know how they did any of this back then. And then when the government started making all the major studios give up their theaters as part of the antitrust laws again, for some reason United Artists was able to take control of their theater, I guess because they weren't that big of a company.
Right.
And then in 1955, the United Artists became the second theater in LA equipped to project 70 millimeter movies.
Oh.
The first one in the city was the Egyptian Theater, and it was as such that the movie Oklahoma began a 52-week run at the theater. That's a year,
That is a year.
of Oklahoma.
Wow.
And then after the 52-week run was up, the theater was closed. And then in 1961, it was still owned by the United Artists Theater Circuit. So then it reopened then as the Alameda Theater, which showed Mexican films, but that didn't work out, and then they closed again in 1962. And then after that, it changed hands a few times, showing movies sporadically until it closed for good as a film theater in 1989. And then from 1989 to 2010, it was the Los Angeles University Cathedral, and that was the church that was run by the televangelist Dr. Gene Scott, who's very famous in LA history.
Uh-huh.
He had, he would broadcast his Sunday sermons, and he was one of the wacky, over the top. He was the guy that urged the Gulf War President Bush regarding Iraq to nuke him in the name of Jesus. He's the guy who put the big neon Jesus Saves signs.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the ones that they were on top of the United Artists building.
I always thought it was Jesus Shaves.
So then in 2005, Scott died. And in 2010, his wife moved the church to Glendale, and she took one of the Jesus Saves signs with her. But one of them is still on top of the building, and they're going to keep it there for good.
Yeah.
So the building then went for sale for $15 million, but nobody was buying it, so they dropped it to $12 million, which seems really low to have a huge theater like that.
Yeah.
I can tell you're interested.
$12 million.
And it was bought by the Ace Hotel, which just opened up like less than a month ago. The Ace, it's this hip upscale hotel chain from Portland, Oregon. They have locations in Portland, Seattle, Palm Springs, New York, London, and Panama City, and at Los Angeles. It has 182 rooms and a very popular rooftop bar.
I bet.
They now run the theater there, which is called the Theater at Ace Hotel. It's no longer the United Artists Theater. It's the home base of the LA Dance Project, which is run by Benjamin Millepied, who is the husband of Natalie Portman / the choreographer of Black Swan.
The guy who ruined my life, okay?
The guy who stole Natalie Portman from you. Now the theater will be housing dance and a few other live musical performances, but it seems like the days of showing movies there are over, at least for now. The theater's first show actually is going to be on Valentine's Day, which is a few days from now. And the Ace is now the flagship of the revitalization efforts that are going right now in the Broadway district. So now we'll talk about that.
Okay.
For a long time, the Los Angeles Historical Theater Foundation was like the guardian of the Broadway theaters. They tried a lot of times very successfully to get as many of the theaters as they could to grant them cultural historical monument status so that they would be protected from any structural remodeling or demolishing or anything. They also had a team of unpaid volunteers that would keep an eye on all of the theaters to make sure that no illegal changes were being made to them.
They were all armed.
Now the big thing that's happening now, in 2008, a 10-year, $40 million campaign was started by Councilman Jose Huizar called Bringing Back Broadway. And it was launched to reactivate the street, which is the word they're using. Right. And in the campaign, the plans were to get the remaining theaters going again and give them new life and to start a whole new theater district there. The plans, they wanted to get new businesses to come to the area and move into all the commercial space that was right now currently vacant, and to get all the office spaces on the upper floors of all these buildings going again in the form of businesses and also affordable housing. And these upper floors on the street, they have 1 million square feet worth of space that have been empty for decades.
Oh, rats.
They're currently in the process, they're shrinking the street from 4 to 3 traffic lanes. And they're doing that so then they're widening the sidewalks to make more room for pedestrians to walk around. And they're going to have more trees, sidewalk cafes, a bunch of benches you could sit on, and that this should all be done. Well, the street work should be done by the end of this summer. They also want to preserve the street's history and the culture, and even give all the theaters, give them new marquees and neon signs that like stick out into the street and that actually work. And then biggest of all, their dream has always been to get the streetcar back. But it's had a lot of financial troubles. But in 2012, they were approved to be able to tax the downtown landowners up to $85 million to get a downtown streetcar going again. So it seems like it's happening. The plan's currently under environmental review, but they hope that it should be up and running by 2016.
Okay.
And meanwhile, the street, it's starting to come back to life a little bit. And what seemed impossible by getting the United Artists Theater going back again, they did it. And so, I mean, they can do it.
Yeah, okay.
They have like we were talking about, the Last Remaining Seats program. It shows old movies in the Los Angeles Theater, the Orpheum, the $1 Million Theater.
Mm-hmm.
January 25th, just a couple weeks ago, was the 6-year anniversary of bringing back Broadway. They had a bunch of talks and tours, and a lot of the theaters were open to the public, and you could just go in. It was the first time in decades that so many of the theaters on that street were open all at one time. And even a little further up north, where it all began, at the Merced Theater, they're getting a $23 million upgrade to get it back in operation, and they're going to have it as the new home of Channel 35, the public access channel. Yeah.
Oh, we gotta get in there.
So things are starting to come together. The Rialto is an Urban Outfitters, but they still kept the marquee.
That's
and a Whole Foods is coming to the area, which brings us to our next topic, something we all know and love, gentrification.
Is one of us currently going through gentrification right now?
There's all these new hip stores and hotels that are coming, and they're all being accused of gentrification. They say it's not going to happen because they're not focusing on closing all the ethnic places that are already there, but rather just opening up all the unused space. To their credit, they are staying true to the architecture and the history of the area.
Right.
But gentrification, I mean, it's really inevitable because it might not be their intention, but eventually all the little cheap stores that all the Spanish-speaking people, the ones who kept the area going and not from being demolished for decades,
are going to be squeezed out.
Yeah, well, they're saying they're not going to do it, but then when things start getting nice, the rent's going to go up and they can't afford it.
Yeah.
And then the people themselves, the people that come there to be shop, let's be honest, immigrants. And some people are not legal immigrants.
Right.
And when the area becomes more rich and has more, let's be honest, white people around, it's going to make people who are immigrants or not here legally, sometimes it's going to make them uncomfortable being there, so they take their business elsewhere. So those little shops might lose a lot of their support. Is this good? Is this bad? I don't know.
And let's not forget that they'll be able to buy out these smaller stores too if they could. And then some of these people are struggling. They have been struggling for a very long time with these stores. Will take the opportunity to move out, but what we're losing when they go is an authenticity that's, like you said, kept it going for this whole time. It's funny that you're talking about them bringing back Broadway when Broadway is the one street for the most part, like maybe the first half, or there's like a good chunk that between like 3rd and maybe 7th that is left pretty much by itself because you can't put anything there. So Maine has changed a lot. Spring has changed a lot. Broadway hasn't really changed a lot. And then you go over to Grand has always been good. Olive and Hill have pretty much been fine. But these other streets like beyond Broadway are moving up, and then
I think because they had so many obstacles with like what they can and can't do in those buildings, which kind of hurt it. But I don't know, they're getting it going again.
Like this moment right now, where like the periphery of Broadway is like it has bars, it has like places to go, and it has the Last Bookstore, which I like. It has the Cecil Hotel, which is great.
Hopefully, the Cecil Hotel gets more business from all this. The room's thirst for blood.
We need a sacrifice in downtown. We just need it. I'm very interested in seeing how this how it spreads out, because you're seeing it like getting closer to you. You've seen it go like south. Echo Park. Obviously is not the Echo Park that I grew up in. And then it's moving like across the river now. It's going to like Boyle Heights is becoming like an area like this, and Highland Park is. So I'm interested in seeing how it spreads out and what stops it, where the border of like, we can't go past like, we can't do this in City Terrace. That's not cool. We can't do this in
This isn't fun anymore. I was reading a thing that was saying what's happening, because similar things are happening in New York, which it could be a glimpse of what LA has to deal with in the future, because things are getting
They're
so
always
expensive.
ahead of the game.
I know. What they're trying to do is like, things are going to get nicer and more expensive, but it should be mandated, and also people who have consciences to, keep prices reasonable for people, who can't afford it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and don't push it. Don't push all the people who've been struggling here. Don't make everybody move to Riverside County. Don't make everybody move to San Bernardino.
Yeah. And then when they move there, let's put a big fence so that they can't come back.
Like a wall, because fences are easy to cross. Let's be honest.
Fences have footholds.
We'll build a Warner Fox Theater over there. Whatever.
We'll give you whatever you want as long as it's closed. I want to give a special thanks to Bill Counter from the Los Angeles Theater's Blogspot website. It's a really good website. It has everything. We stole everything from it. Anything you want to know about any theater in LA, he has pictures, like archival pictures, new pictures, everything, every piece of information. And I was sending him emails. He was responding. He was really helpful. He put up with my ignorance. And I hope he doesn't sue me for saying his name, but he's probably not going to hear this because nobody will.
Nobody will.
Final thoughts?
It was a lot of fun reading about how awful Joe Kennedy is. And now I'm going to be whacked by the Kennedy family. That's the last you'll ever hear of me.
The Kennedy curse will spread to you.
It was nice. It was nice. It was nice. Yet again.
That's been LA Meekly. Catchphrase pending.